Okay, this is Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee. We're here for LO 18-0036, Legislative Oversight, Investigative Hearing on the Fire Department. I am Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the committee, joined to my left by Council President Bernard C. Jack Young, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, Councilman Brandon Scott, 2nd District, Councilman John Bullock, 9th District, Councilman Z. Cohen, 1st District, Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. To my right, Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, also joined by Matt Peters, staff to the committee, Michael Huber from the Council President's Office. We have Karan Banks representing Mayor Catherine Pugh, and Rebecca Tabb, who is attorney for the City Council, and Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th District, and Liam Davis from the Council President's Office, as well as Lester Davis from Council President Young's office. Real quickly, by a show of hands, who is here to testify from the public? Is there anyone here who is planning on testifying today from the public? Public testimony is welcome at this. Okay, we'll come back again at the end. We're going to start off with brief remarks from, actually we're going to start off with the video we received. And then I'll go to the Council President for remarks. Can we start that video, please? Okay, so we held a hearing on City Council Bill 18-0259 on June 19th. We went into recess. We then held a work session on June 20th, voted it out of committee. We agreed to work with the fire department and basically hold that bill on second reader if we saw demonstrable progress on a number of development projects as well as the cycle track projects. In a sign of good faith, we followed through on that commitment. We held the bill on second reader. Earlier that day, we received a letter from the Chief of Staff, Amy Beth Leisure. That letter, I thought, and I think I speak for my colleagues, felt like this attempted to address some of the concerns that we discussed during the hearing. There were updates on several development projects on the cycle track committee, cycle track updates, the PUD review committee, and the plan review process and projects currently under review. In addition to that, we received a letter from Chief Ford with a DVD, hard copy delivered, stating, I am compelled to express my concerns about City Council Bill 18-0259 that would eliminate International Fire Code Appendix D and the subsequent amendment that would remove a component of Chapter 5 in that code. I would like to state, first of all, that BCFD is not anti-cycle tracks or anti-development. However, we are charged with the responsibility of protecting the community from a contemporary perspective as well as from a strategic long-range outlook. BCFD does override, and I have personally overridden the IFC where it was reasonable. It should be noted that some of the considerations in these thought processes have involved larger structures, residential issues, and even 10-story dormitory structures without sprinkler systems that propose limiting access to our units. These are major life safety considerations and must be handled in a manner that is apolitical and sober of emotion. To ensure that you have an opportunity to make an informed decision on the proposed bill, I've included with this memo a DVD which illustrates the challenges the fire department has on narrow streets. Please take the time to review this short, edited 2-minute portion of the video, and keep in mind that during this demonstration, our folks had the luxury of controlling outrigger placement because there was no specific location of an emergency. I've also included maps of fires and fire-related deaths throughout the city. In closing, I completely respect the office you hold and the weight of your decision. I'm happy to address any questions that you may have. Respectfully, Chief Ford. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Council President Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad that I got a chance to see the video because it shows me clearly that the fire department can get to fires in these narrow streets. Baltimore had many narrow streets throughout the city of Baltimore, and I've never seen a fire truck not being able to access and get to the fire to put it out. So it clearly shows me that even with the long ladder trucks making those curves that they have to make, that they can respond to fires in Baltimore City, despite the fact that these development projects are being held up because of the perceived notion that the fire department cannot get to the fire and place their trucks in a safe way. From what I've seen, you can get to any fire you want through those narrow streets. So I'm glad I saw the video because it showed me clearly that those trucks can maneuver through those streets and can get to these buildings to put out fires.
Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for those opening remarks also, Mr. Council President. Do you want me to just start by reading this letter? Look, I think there is an overwhelming variety of information here to discuss, starting with what that video is actually intended to demonstrate, since I don't really think that we got a particularly good explanation of that, and I can't discern anything that would be favorable to the fire department in that video. The problems inherent in the decision to actually make it in the first place, which I'm going to touch on by reading a letter in a couple of moments. But some of that, but also some of the background and the history around this problem, the fire department and its leadership in particular, that have been particularly ongoing over the last year, and some patterns of behavior that there's an even longer record of. I think that, though, the first thing that I want to do is read for the record here a letter that's been distributed to members of the committee, so that we're all clear about, you know, the kind of lived experience that we're now addressing with this video. This is dated July 3rd, 2018, a statement from Liz Cornish, Executive Director of Baltimore, for the Judiciary and Legislative Investigations hearing on the Baltimore City Fire Department. Over the past year and a half, and I'm saying I'm reading this also because Liz could not be here today. She had previous plans to be out of state. Over the past year and a half, Baltimore has engaged in discussions with city leadership regarding the Baltimore City Fire Department's current interpretation of city-adopted international fire code, specifically definitions of and regulations about clear width on fire and aerial fire apparatus access roads. We have utilized hundreds of staff hours in service to the city, connecting city staff to national experts, writing white papers on fire access and fire code practices, and meeting in person with city officials and staff, including leadership at the Baltimore City Fire Department. In April 2017, the current fire code interpretation arose during the installation of the Potomac Street Protected Bike Lane. A Facebook group called Canton Neighbors Against the Potomac Street Bike Lane was formed. Many avenues were pursued by this group to try and halt construction, but the one that gained traction was the suggestion that all public streets, not just fire lanes, in newly constructed subdivisions, should be considered fire apparatus access roads. This avenue gained traction with the assistance of several firefighters who joined Canton Neighbors Against the Potomac Street Bike Lane, including Tim Myers and a man with the pseudonym Char Lee, with a profile photo that appeared to be Charles Mudra. These firefighters, along with others, engaged in online fear-mongering by providing citizens with inaccurate information about the project and Baltimore. As a result of the rhetoric and bullying culture these firefighters were creating online, I received threats from strangers through both my personal social media accounts and through comment threads on local news articles. A year ago, Baltimore brought our concerns about these handful of firefighters to the Mayor's Chief of Strategic Alliances, Jim Smith, as well as to the BCFD leadership. We warned that if not checked, the behavior of these firefighters would continue to escalate and become dangerous. On May 14th, BCDOT hosted a meeting at Baltimore School for the Arts to discuss the revisions to the Center and Monument Street Protected Bike Lane project. The revisions make the project compliant with BCFD's requested clear widths. At this public meeting in a school, attended by approximately 75 people, including students, Baltimore City firefighter Charles Mudra assaulted Austin Davis, a Baltimore City employee attending the meeting as a private citizen. I witnessed the assault. Despite violently choking Austin, Mudra was allowed to leave without any consequence. He gave the school resource officer a fake name. The following day, Davis, who I've known for 2 years both professionally and as a neighbor on the 2700 block of Maryland Avenue, asked for my help filing charges. We often assist bicyclists with legal matters. I referred him to an attorney and told him not to speak to anyone else besides his supervisors about the matter. That day, he received multiple messages on his work telephone from a captain in the Baltimore City Fire Department. After work, he continued to receive calls on his personal cell phone, a number the fire department somehow obtained on their own. The same week as that incident, I was approached by a developer whose previously approved project was now facing redesign demands from the fire department. He was concerned because the fire marshal had gone on a tirade about bicyclists, claiming When they're hit and killed by people driving cars, it's just, quote, Darwinism. The developer feared reporting this incident would result in further repercussions on his project. On June 2nd, I was texted by a friend, Alyssa Domzal, who had just been assaulted while riding her bike. A person in a pickup truck swerved at her while driving at high speed, stopped the truck in front of her, and screamed, quote, "I still hate you." She noticed a BCFD decal in the back window. A month later, we are unaware of any BCFD efforts to identify the assailant. In short, the escalation we warned about caused by the very individuals we warned about, occurred just as we said it would. BCFD leadership did nothing to stop it, and neither did the mayor's office. After Austin's assault, I met with Jim Smith and again demanded he or the mayor begin to take this behavior seriously. He replied, "I don't know what else you want me to do. He's facing criminal charges." After Alyssa's incident, I emailed urging further action. I never received a response. While Baltimore didn't play a role in the introduction of the bill to remove Appendix D, submitted by Councilman Dorsey, I believe it to be a response to multiple bicycle infrastructure and private development projects being derailed, multiple incidents with firefighters assaulting or harassing citizens, and no movement toward progress exhibited from either BCFD or the mayor's office. Baltimore attended and submitted testimony on the hearing on Tuesday, June 19th. Our testimony was submitted alongside citizens and private developers in support of the bill. The hearing concluded at approximately 12 p.m. At 3 p.m., I was walking home from my office. As I approached my block, I noticed a BCFD tiller truck parked in the travel lane in front of my house, surrounded by around 8 BCFD employees, including many senior-ranking staff based on their uniforms. My initial assumption was there was some kind of emergency on my block, but as I got closer, I recognized that the fire department was filming a video. Given the history of aggression and bullying over the past year, BCFD leadership showing up on my block to film a video implying they can't fight a fire there didn't just feel like a double down on fear-mongering. It also felt like a personal message to me and to my neighbor, Austin Davis, a threat. I immediately called Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Commission Chair John Laria, who instructed me to notify Kara Kunst in the Council President's office and Tony Scott in Jim Smith's office. While I was on the phone in front of my home, I saw Chief Everett and made eye contact with her as she got into a maroon fire department SUV and drove away ahead of the tiller truck. I called Kara and explained the scene and sent a few photos I took. I made the decision because of the past dismissal of my concerns not to notify Jim Smith's office. I respect the work of the Baltimore City Fire Department. I respect the work that the Baltimore City Fire Department does. They serve our city in immeasurable ways, but my job is to advocate for street design that is proven to increase bike ridership while reducing injury and death of vulnerable road users. That means that sometimes my advocacy will be at odds with past practices, as my job is to advocate for new solutions. I have had tense meetings with city senior staff and elected officials on a wide range of issues in my role as executive director of Baltimore. It's expected that we will not always be in agreement. Our city is filled with advocates, sometimes forcefully demanding change. It is part of the process of democracy. But I have never felt that holding to a policy position different than that of the city would lead to me being personally threatened in my own home. In fact, I have always been proud of the fact that despite my job to hold a specific position, I make every effort to support and celebrate the city when we agree. Because in the end, I have always believed we have the same goals, improving the public health, safety, and quality of life of Baltimore City residents. The actions of these senior officials in the fire department made me question that. It felt personal, it felt threatening, and it made me feel less safe in my home. Appreciate everybody taking the time to hear this letter. It's really upsetting to me, and it raises for me a lot of questions about the leadership of the department. And so I guess you know, my initial statements, I guess my initial thoughts, because I haven't really gathered all of them, and I haven't really prepared thoughts. I have some questions here that I want to ask the chief and others. But the decision, I still can't understand what this video is supposed to show, so maybe we ought to just start hear from the chief on what this is actually supposed to show. Then we can go from there. Chief Ford.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Chair, other members of the council. Baltimore City Fire Department is a well-respected organization, and we've worked very hard to get that way. On our left shoulder, we wear a patch that says "Pride Protecting People." What has me very concerned and very frustrated, quite frankly, is even some of the things that were stated in this letter, and I'm feeling very comfortable that they were inaccurate to what we know to be the fact. First of all, I don't, and the people that I sent to Maryland Avenue know where Liz Cornish lives. We don't know. And quite frankly, most of us would not know who she is if she walked up and talked to us. So it wasn't a goal to try to intimidate anybody. That is not what the fire department does. And that's not the culture that we're trying to perpetuate. Now, I'm not saying I don't have one or two issues or one or two people that are issues. I have over 1,800 people that work for me. And I heard something saying of multiple events. I know nothing about multiple events, nor do I know anything about social media ahead of time where people were reaching out in social media. So I don't know anything. I can't address those things. I had already talked to Chief Everett before we walked in. Chief Everett told me she did not know who Liz is unless she walked up and introduced herself as that person. So I'm struggling with it. I've been here going on 5 years, and my commitment to the community, I believe, has been second to none. At least I've tried to make it that way. I've tried to make sure that you're proud that I'm your fire chief and that I keep the highest level of integrity possible. I also put our people in a position where they hold themselves at the highest level. So I'm going to go through some of the things that were pointed out. The reason for making the video was I felt as I tried to explain the issues, not necessarily, Council President, with riding down the road. The issues with setting up outriggers in order to stand up a ladder. Because if we don't set up the outriggers and we stand up the ladder truck tips over. And it tips over with people on it. And we can't use it. That's the reason why I figured, I came to the conclusion that, and I talked about it with staff for a while. Because I felt like I wasn't explaining as accurately, as critically, or as clear as I could have what those outriggers do and the importance of them in this process. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted you all to be able to look at that video. And I think I've said this. I really respect the labor and the yoke of your position. And ultimately, whatever you come out with, we're going to try to work and make it happen because our goal is to protect people, and that's what we're going to do. But we wanted you to have the opportunity to know what we were doing and what we do out in the field.
Chief?
Yes.
I'd like to respectfully interrupt for a moment. Can you explain why that block was selected?
That block was selected primarily because that road was one of the roads that was put on the diet. We've been on that road and done that before. That is not the first time. We've done it there and we've done it at Potomac. We took the department, last time we went, we took people from the city, we took people from City Hall, DOT, and we went out there and took pictures and set up that apparatus on that same street, in the same places.
Right.
And I think that was about 3 months ago?
That cycle track on Maryland Cathedral is what, 2 miles long?
Mm-hmm.
2.6 miles long?
Yes, sir.
I would implore you to consider how a reasonable person could conclude that of all of the block faces on a 2.6 mile stretch, when it's on the same block that the head of Baltimore and the individual from the planning department who was assaulted both live on, how a reasonable person could come to that conclusion that they felt threatened, especially considering it's 2.6 miles long. You probably have a good 50 or 60 blocks on that stretch, and that was the block that was selected. I'm only asking you to consider how a reasonable person could come to that conclusion.
I am trying, and I'll go back to this. We did not know, and we have done this before. I mean, literally almost identical places. Can I finish my statement?
Please.
Okay, thank you.
Just add one thing.
Councilman Dorsey.
I mean, look, we did not know holds up to a degree. Maybe if you're talking about a non-city employee, Liz Cornish. But in fact, this DVD was delivered to us in the council on the very day that a fire department employee was appearing in court as the defendant in the charge of assault against Austin Davis. So there is like official public record of who Austin Davis, a city employee, is. You make $190,000 a year, am I correct?
Sir?
I expect that somebody that we pay significantly in that manner to be able to take certain things in consideration. Where out of the 50 blocks or whatever it is would be the dead worst place to do such a thing. But go on.
Okay. I also want to explain why we use the tiller truck. I'll go back to what you said. I did not know. I want to explain why we use the tiller truck. It's been said that that's the largest truck, that we would not have even used that truck. Well, the truth of the matter is that truck has been responding on that street last month. We moved truck 25 from its original location several months ago into Hamden. So that will be the second truck in. The reason why that truck was sent is because the first incoming truck, truck 16, I think it is, 16 truck, was out on a call, which would consequently, exactly what happened is what we did. We called the next unit in. And it makes more sense to use a tiller because a tiller has a driver in the back, thank you, has a driver in the back, and it can navigate the corners. If I would have brought a straight truck, we might not have been able to make the turns as easily. So we're going to consciously use a tiller because of the challenges we know we have on that street. So I also want to point out the fact that it was said that that is the largest truck we have. That is not true. That's about the average size of the ladder trucks we have. The largest truck we have is, I believe, 81, platform 81, and the snorkel. Those are the largest ones we have. And we've taken that. In fact, the 3 months ago when we went, we took that down the road. And we kept knocking down bollards as we started making turns around the corner, so we didn't do it. So I want you to know that over the past 2 years, truck 1 has responded on Maryland Avenue in that street, truck 5 has responded on that street, truck 10 has responded on that street, truck 16 has responded on that street, truck 25, truck 29, and truck 30 has responded on that street. When I meet with my fire marshals, the people who work for my fire marshal's office, and I try to meet with them regularly, one of the things that they normally say is that that they feel like they're under siege, they feel like they're under attack all the time. And one of the things I encourage them to do is, as they go out there and perform their duties, their highest priority is public safety. That's what they do. I said, exercise the code, pay attention to public safety, and leave the politics to me, and don't get involved with the politics. Another thing I tell my people is this: leave a legacy, not a burden. Leave a legacy, not a burden. And what I'm telling them to do is, don't leave problems for our successors that we should clear up right now. And let's try to do as much right as we possibly can. It is not my goal, nor my organization's goal, to intimidate anyone. We just want to offer the highest level of public safety that the city can possibly offer. I've sent people to Canada to try to see what they're doing on bikes. I've been in contact with New York. I'm going to Philadelphia, and I've contacted Philadelphia, so I know what they're doing. So we're trying to figure out a way to get there. But our highest priority at the end of the day is public safety. And I'm prepared for any questions.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Ford, and we've talked about this before, but I just want to just be clear. From your estimation, are there streets in the city of Baltimore that don't have bike infrastructure,
yes,
but still have the same width of that street, you know, if you take into consideration the cars being parked on both sides?
Clearance width.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And can we say that there's a significant amount of streets in the city of Baltimore that have a similar clearance?
It would be
or width?
fair to say that, yes.
So knowing that you aren't the director of the Department of Transportation, but in your capacity, understanding, you know, I guess the public safety issues related to that width, how many streets have you, you know, working with the Department of Transportation, requested that parking would be removed on either side of the street so that fire trucks would have sufficient clearance?
I have not. But one of the things talking to Philadelphia in particular, one of the things I've realized is we didn't have an opportunity when the bike lanes were being put in place. Mm-hmm. We weren't on the front end. We wound up being on the back end after everything was down. One of the things that we found out from Philadelphia is that they were sitting on the front end. Not only were they sitting on the front end, not only was DOT sitting on the front end, but parking was sitting on the front end. Mm-hmm. And they were pulling up parking spaces. So
are you saying that now that you've talked with Philadelphia, that will be a stance that you would have moving forward? Or
what I'm saying is that I'm trying to see what other departments are doing, mm-hmm, and that's one of the things they're doing, and I am going to take it under consideration.
Yeah, and part of my reason to bring it up, I mean, if we're going to talk about public safety as it relates to being able to respond to fires, then I'm of the opinion it should be across the board, whether, you know, that we're looking at widths related to parking or widths related to bike infrastructure. Mm-hmm. There shouldn't be a variance or a difference in how we look at one and look at the other. I mean, a street that has parking on both sides that still restricts the width, mm-hmm, is just as dangerous as the example. Like you didn't have to go to a street, right, that had, you know, a bike infrastructure. You could have taken the truck to many other streets in the city and shown, you know, the challenges that the fire department has. Yeah, but the difference in that is that some of these other streets already meet with access for us. And as I think we might have talked, one of the concerns I have, these other issues are there. We can't change them. It seems counterintuitive to public safety for the ones that do to turn around and make that they don't. I would argue with you all, and I would contend rather, that if something happens on one of these streets 10 years from now,
and I did not lay out everything I understood about what could happen, there will be people saying, Chief, why didn't you bring this up? Chief, you had a video. You could have told us these things. And you'd be right. So my job is, as the expert of the fire service, is to tell you what I think I see and tell you what I think I know. I am your local expert. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you what I think I see. I'm telling you what I think. And even talking to several other organizations, their perspective was generally in line with mine. I wasn't developing it on my own. I was not being argumentative to try to get my way. That's not my concern. My concern is to do as much right as possible. But to turn around something that meets code and then turn around and make it not meet code, and it's not as much an access issue as it is being able to set up the outriggers in order to stand up the ladder, it's a challenge for me.
Right, and I can respect that, but I guess what I'm not understanding is how vocal and how much of an advocate you are as it relates to projects moving forward when the same risks are associated with pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you might feel as though in your capacity you don't have the ability to change it, but that doesn't change your advocacy or your voice saying that, from my expert opinion, that this potentially presents for my team and what I need to do a risky or dangerous situation. I feel like that regardless of bike infrastructure, you should just be as equally vocal about streets that are restricted because of parking on each side. And I don't see the balance there. I mean, I think
part of the reason that you see what you see now is because the issue is that's before us. I am an advocate of sprinklered buildings, a strong advocate. But we have several buildings that are grandfathered in that don't meet code, current code, but they met the code when they were being built, kind of like our streets. But I'm a strong advocate for it. I speak about it. I write on it.
Right,
but I think because this dynamic is in front of us right now, that's the reason why it's so visual to me.
Right, and but sprinklers in a building and the convenience of parking are two separate issues. You should be more of an advocate against parking being removed because it is simply a convenience, and if that convenience is potentially putting citizens in harm's way, I would feel like every time you came in before us, you would be saying, and we need to be removing parking from this street, and we need to be removing parking from this street, because it is something that we can literally do that makes the whole community safe. I just don't get it. That was the end of my question.
Councilman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Ford.
Yes, sir.
Just like a follow-up to my colleague, Councilman Pinkett. Do you guys know, or can you tell us how many instances in the last year of you guys responding out were prohibited or had difficulties because of a size of a street or other things that are in bike lanes or whatever that's at the location that have prohibited you from getting to the issue as fast as possible? Is that something that we keep a record of? No,
we don't. Primarily because the process of navigating around circumstances is what we do on a normal basis. When streets are closed, we go around the street. We don't document the fact that our response time changed because of street closure. We don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, just thinking if you didn't, the only way to do that would probably be to go back and listen to, CAD or the radio. So, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, do we have some type of after fire report? So, for example, your team, one of your teams will go out, they'll fight a fire gets under control, everyone goes back to the firehouse after. Is there some type of after-action report that's completed? We
normally do something like a post-incident action, a hot wash, but it's only specific incidences where there were challenges in actually putting out the fire. Maybe someone got hurt, and those are more documented for safety reasons rather than slow response time. Has more to do with the challenges we might have had to save people, or if something happened where one of our people were endangered. And we're trying to get lessons learned and best practices afterwards.
Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you. I want to, again, echo what Councilman Pinkett has been hitting on, that of all the places which you acknowledge, there are many throughout this whole city that you could have chosen that didn't have this cycling infrastructure on it, despite saying in your letter that you don't have anything inherently against cycling infrastructure. You said, you know, you chose this place, and you're saying that it's because, and I hear you saying because this is an issue that's before us, but the reality is that actually this is an issue that's behind us. This is infrastructure that is now in place and has been in place for quite some time, was already in place for quite some time before the fire department started to create this issue when the Potomac Street infrastructure came up, but you still chose to go to this Maryland Avenue cycle track, targeting it as cycling infrastructure. And so I think that it is fair to say that you are discriminatory in where you are deciding to try to make a point, which, again, I'm still unclear what the point is that was trying to be made. I did ask you to try to clarify the point of the video. From what I can tell of that video, the point is that a driver was unwilling to park the truck 5 feet farther forward or 5 feet farther back so that he could easily open the driver's door, and that's about it. I really can't tell any other point to the demonstration on the 2700 block except to intimidate the people who live there and demonstrate to them that you won't be fighting fires when one occurs on that block, even though I know that in recent past you have fought fires on that block, even in the home of former City Paper reporter Baynard Woods, that you had no problem servicing that block, but that you just chose to use this truck in this way and demonstrate that a driver, if they chose to be unwilling to move the truck farther forward or backward, they might have difficulty opening a door. Further, you took it down Cathedral Street, and what I think you're trying to show is the pitch at which you used that ladder to get up to the very top of the building. I agree, it's pretty steep. Is that, just if you could answer, is that the intent of that demonstration there on Cathedral Street?
The pitch of what? The ladder truck's ladder?
The ladder truck's ladder.
I don't think the picture of the ladder truck's ladder was unsafe. The picture of the manual ladder that they stood up, I wouldn't climb up because they almost stood it straight up.
Yeah, but we have smaller apparatuses that would allow you to use an automatic ladder, motorized ladder.
No, sir.
Oh, you don't have smaller apparatuses than this that have
our
other
ladders. All these units are generally the same size. Generally, I'm using the word generally. The outriggers.
So you're saying that the ladder truck that you took there, the aerial tower 25, is capable of reaching the very top of that building, but not capable of reaching the lower level of that building? That you would have to try to? I just don't understand. Well, I'm trying to understand the demonstration.
I want to respectfully say what I'm getting ready to say. I'm the fire chief, partly because I have experience, mostly because I have experience with this. And what's a struggle to me is that I've had a bunch of people who tell me how the fire department works and how we fight fire. The reason why we bring a ladder truck is for specific reasons: rescue, evacuation, ventilation, and some other things. The engine company comes, it's a suppression unit. It carries 500 gallons of water when it gets there, has enough water to do some fighting for a couple minutes, hooks up to the hydrant, and runs in. But the ladder truck usually gets there ahead of time, usually, not always, and begins the saving of people and the ventilation, which is important in order to control the fire, remove the smoke and everything away from people. So there'll be different dynamics about how that's done depending on where the fire is. It could be on one of the higher floors. It could be on the bottom floor. All that matters. And when the shift commander gets on the scene, he has to make a determination as these vehicles come in, what he's going to place, why they're going to do what they're doing, and where they're going to be at. So to look at it and say, in just a blanket statement, it wouldn't be factual. It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be reasonable. The only thing, and I'll go back to this, the only reason that I gave you all the video, and I thought about it, is to make sure you knew what I thought I saw, so you can make an informed decision. I don't carry the weight of your office. I think I've told several of you all that you're not in jeopardy of me running for your office either, at all, because I think it's such a heavy burden in many cases. But my job is public safety. My job is to take care of the community from a standpoint of fire, EMS, and all risk hazards. And what I'm telling you is what I think is right. But I understand, you've got to, you've got to make a decision. But I wanted to make sure you knew what I thought I knew, as much as I could share with you.
Oh, Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. Just a really short follow-up. You mentioned to the chairman that you typically do not do after-action reports. Is that standard operating procedure for both this department historically and a best practice associated with other departments? And secondly, you mentioned that if there are, that the reports are written if there is difficulty accessing fire, if I heard that correctly. If so, where are those reports maintained? Who are they shared with? Where do they go? And how could we gain access to that data? Because I think the video was helpful in sort of an anecdotal fashion for us to see, but without any real concrete data on difficulty of accessing fires or issues, I think it becomes very difficult to make the case that this is an issue. Because I mean, I have friends that live in Patterson Park or Federal Hill, where the streets are narrow. There's streets in my district that the streets are very narrow, so much so that people are parking on sidewalks, which is a whole other issue. My street is pretty narrow in Edmondson Village. And so I would think it would be incredibly helpful for us in advocating and working with Department of Transportation if we did have actual data to show that there are access issues throughout the city, so that we can make more informed decisions when talking about shifting parking or angled parking or street width or bike infrastructure or other roadway changes. I think that would be critical for both advocacy from the fire department, but so also that our Department of Transportation can make more informed decisions.
Councilman, as I must not have been clear enough, we don't track that. We don't track what slows us down, things of that nature. We haven't been tracking that. Maybe that's something we should consider tracking. We have not done it up until now, because the common practice and the common perspective is that you're going to have obstacles to overcome, and that's just part of the gig. That's part of the response. That's part of the job. So that hadn't been something we've normally done. The other component about the hot wash, post-incident action, the after action, we don't do it for every instance, but there are specific things that may trigger it, or the shift commander or the incident commander that was on the scene may say, we're going to do it. We're going to do an after action on this because we need to learn from what we just did. So that's not uncommon. They have the authority to do that. So we don't do it for every one of them. So
Again, I'll go back to the part of the original question is, do other departments do that?
I've worked for, yeah, it varies. I've worked for several different departments. One of the departments I worked with very, very rarely did it. I think the only one we did it on was we had a firefighter that died in a fire.
And which department is that, sir?
Fulton County, Georgia.
County.
That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. I'm not saying we didn't do other ones, but that was the one that was very specific and distinct that stuck out. Lincoln did, when I was at Lincoln did more of those. But part of the challenge with this organization, trying to do one for every call we run on, is we run 200 and some odd thousand calls a year. I don't know how they'd be able to get that done, or I don't know the practicality of it either. I think it needs to introduce new information, and we send them through training every year. When we get new things in the government, I mean, in the fire service at large, But when something happens in the department, case in point, 2 years ago, we had an issue with basement fires that specifically dealt with furnaces. We developed a training procedure, and we went through the process of making sure everybody does it, because we have 2-in-1 training, so everyone goes out and does training annually.
Well, and I'll stop this. I know there's some other questions. Again, I would implore that to be a serious consideration. I mean, as much as, you know, I look at the maps that are provided to us in this packet. For example, there's one here, fire deaths from 2010 to 2018. I mean, there's a hyper concentration in District 9, District 12, just District 11. I think it would be helpful to know that if on any given block, if every time you drove up to, you know, Patterson Park, whatever 100 block there's always issues on this particular block, that would be something that would be worth tracking, so that if that council member or staff assigned from the Department of Transportation that should be a consideration. Or if we know that on those particular blocks there are constant issues there, that when a developer comes and says, hey, we want to do a project here, you have data that shows that there are often issues on that block. And I'm just saying this from a public safety perspective, that if we're not tracking where the concerns are, and you have your firefighters constantly driving to these particular blocks, that they, as new firefighters come and go, they don't have that data. They're showing up and they don't know that on this unit block, the road is extremely narrow, and yet again they're caught up or slowed down. That could cost somebody a life. And I don't know how hard it would be to hire another administrator or to work with the mayor's office to find someone in transportation that could act as a liaison that you could send this over to. I mean, it's 2018. I mean, we have ways to we can put together a Google form for you pretty quick. There you can check a couple boxes and say, you know, we've had several calls on this block. The data's showing this. And I'm a person that's pushing this through every agency, so I'm not, you know, trying to pick on the fire department, but every agency that comes before me, I'm asking, how are you tracking this information, so that we can better map that out and work with City Stat and other organizations to really address these concerns. And I'm not really seeing a reason why this would be very difficult to do from a public safety perspective.
Okay. I wanted to point out something too, where earlier it was said that these bike lanes are passed. Why would you go down? The only reason why I went down, and I say this again, Maryland Avenue, is because we've been down that before. We also did Potomac. Now, what the difference is in Potomac is that we had an opportunity to sit down with DOT and other organizations to try to make it work for all of us. We didn't have that opportunity on Maryland, and I'm concerned we will not have that opportunity in the future. So Philadelphia is one of the organizations, New York's one of them that I can point out. The fire department was at the table. And so if you don't do that, and if you don't take these codes under consideration, we'll have challenges from our perspective, from our professional opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Dorsey.
Just quickly, you said earlier maybe you didn't say yourself, but most people would not recognize Liz Cornish. Would you?
I've seen her a couple times, but I can't tell you I'd know her. I'd tell you that's Liz Cornish.
Would you recognize Jed Weeks or Austin Davis?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Stokes.
Chief Ford, I think we got one of the best fire companies in the country, and I've done projects with you in terms of knocking on doors and make sure people get smoke detectors. But I've talked to a lot of people in the district, and their perception, all due respect to you, that you come over as fighting bike lanes in development, and I hear it all the time. And I use that because I'm talking about, we got 28 projects on the books. 6 of them are in my district, and I'm talking about in African-American district that's been neglected. Now, if we can develop properly, we cut down on our fires, one. The mayor just did a $55 million money she used leverage to go in those most depressed neighborhoods. And I'm talking about Oliver, rebuild Johnson Square, New Broadway East, South Clifton Park. So it's a shame that we sitting here having this fight, but I look at two parts in my district. One part, the development is doing well. The other part, only by design, it needs some help. So the reason why I'm saying is because of this piece that you are, I guess, leveraging, this, your fire trucks can't get down the street. If you look at my district, Councilman Pinkett and some of my other council peers who represent some districts that have been neglected, it's a shame that we sitting here in this meeting when we can be moving forward in terms of development, because if we got a lot of vacant properties, and you do get a lot of fires about property that's been vacant that catch on fire, don't you think the development piece will help cut down on your firefighters being safe and not always battling vacant properties in most of the African-American districts in the city?
Absolutely. We want development throughout the city, absolutely. But Councilman Stokes, I'm glad you brought up the 28 items. We had an opportunity to go through each one of those items, and we found out, quite frankly, that all of them, almost all of them except for 2, I think, has come down to really not being involved with our shop. There hasn't been a project started. It's been on the drawing board, or it's passed us and it's done.
Some of them are over a year with the developers still waiting.
Sir?
Some of them have been held up for over a year.
No, I respectfully disagree. As we sat, we sat down, I even pulled in the planners to go through everything. It turned out not to be completely accurate. Also, case in point, one of the projects has been on the board for 12 years. 12 years, and it's gone through several different changes and modifications. So consequently, when you go through all these changes and modifications, you are going to have to change your perspective of your drawings and what you're doing. And that's what they're doing. The 2 that fall directly in our wheelhouse from what I can see, listening to planning, quite frankly. We are working with them and we're moving, but there has to be a public safety component, because one of them, there is a concern of a residential area, a serious concern of a residential area. And I think we're working through it. But
So, I'm sorry, so you don't think the $55 million that the mayor uses as leverage is actually holding up development in the most neglected neighborhoods in this city?
I'm not talking about that.
Okay, but that's money that the mayor put in to make sure that those neighborhoods that have been neglected, if this piece that you have if it move forward, don't ever happen to it, that's going to stop those neighborhoods that the mayor are targeting that need some development right away.
What I am talking about is the 28 items that we were given, that we sat down and went through, that appeared that either weren't in our shop at all, hadn't been in our shop, had passed us. And the couple that were left that absolutely, unequivocally, are in our shop, and we're working with the individuals. What winds up happening is, quite frankly, is there's a process. Whereas they go and the developers go and sit with the planners, sit with the fire marshal's office, and try to figure out what fits the code, what fits in a certain place. And then they introduce it after that. What has happened, what I believe has happened now, is now that out of expedience, if they don't get what they want right away, they reach out to you all, or they reach out to City Hall. And it puts us in a position where we're trying to play catch up rather than negotiating the best option for public safety.
When no developers reached out to me, I know some of the projects that's still on the book, so
yes,
I don't know who that applied to, but it doesn't apply to me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Councilman Block.
Thank you, Chief Ford, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So just looking at the plan review process, and you talked about the projects that are under review, and it seems that the time frame is generally between 15 and 30 days. Are there times where it goes outside that time frame, and if so, why might that be the case?
In our shop, we try to do 30 days when we get plans. What winds up happening sometimes, let's say, and there's several things that'll happen. Let's say we get the plans, we go through them, we make recommendations to the developer about the corrections that they probably should make. We don't hear back from them. You know, let's say we don't. So when they come back 6 months, 8 months, a year down the line, whatever it is, and they're complaining, saying, I met with the fire department 6 months ago. Well, you're right. You did meet with us 6 months ago. We sent you an outline of what you need to pay attention to, what you need to send back to us, and you never sent it back. That happens often.
So you sort of answered the follow-up that I was going to have, which was, what is the most difficult element? So is it the communication between yourself and developers, or are there other pieces that were missing along the way?
Right. I don't know if it's so much a communications issue. It could be a whole lot of things. The developer may run into funding issues. The developer may have changed their mind, just like in the case of one of the developments I was talking about that went through several different evolutions before 12 years. So it can happen like that. And one of the things that we've done recently, I've got I think sitting over my left shoulder, Mr. Eames, and we brought him in as a manager of plans to make sure we could help move things along. And that's his expertise, part of his expertise, you know. And we're always looking for the best skill base, and I think we got a good talent.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you. So I spent some time talking about, what I think are questionable decision making, or maybe even questionable information gathering. I think it's pretty clear that it wouldn't have been that hard to realize that the 2700 block of Maryland Avenue was probably the dead worst place to do this demonstration. But so aside from that kind of poor decision making, I think, I just can't help but think that these issues around development are also part of a different kind of pattern of or demonstration of just not really understanding. And I can tell you from my personal conversations with you, as you continue to say, my issue is public safety, my issue is public safety, so is mine, right? I'm the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee, and I'm also very active in trying to promote things that will reduce the circumstances where Baltimore City has like 3.5 times the rate of car injuries and deaths of the rest of the state of Maryland. I've tried to have conversations with you about the relationship between that transportation environment and the public safety concerns there, and how they're advanced, or how improvements are hindered by the upholding of these certain fire apparatus access policies. But you didn't really, and have never shown me any real interest in that kind of dialogue where public safety takes a bigger definition than the one that you're relating around fire suppression and such. And I think that is not new, right? You've been in Baltimore since like 2014, and in your previous place of employment, in fact, they were not happy with your ability to take a bigger picture there, right? Chamblee, Georgia, put forth a resolution in their city council, essentially at the end of the day saying that you needed to keep up with the speed at which that place was growing. They wanted you to be in 5th gear, but you were still in 3rd gear, and here we are in a much bigger place, and I still think you're probably in 3rd gear from Chamblee, Georgia. But additionally, I do think that there's a pattern of permissiveness of discriminatory things here. You have a chief who, were you aware of Chief Everett's 24 civil complaints before you hired her when she was in Gary, Indiana? Are those in any way related to the people who worked here and who have left?
Respectfully, Councilman,
been here?
I'm trying to figure out what you're saying and how it relates to what we're holding the conversation here about.
Because
if you want to have a conversation about Chamblee and the things, I'm comfortable with that.
I think it's pretty clear that you're not up to speed when it comes to economic development issues here and what these things mean in a bigger context. Sir?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
And that there's pretty clear evidence that under your leadership, like discrimination, even while we're under a federal consent decree for discriminatory practices within the fire department, has been allowed to persist. We had a letter just recently addressed to Chief Jeffrey Siegel, who I understand he's not here anymore, probably because of the behaviors that are outlined in the letter from Deputy Chief Dwayne Dodwell. I really can't shake this idea that you're discriminatory in your application of the law, and that you're discriminatory in the places where you are choosing to demonstrate the applicability of the law. and just unwilling to look at a big picture.
Yeah. Respectfully, I understand the contemporary politics and what's going on nationally and how people function, but that's not the way I function.
Respectfully,
okay,
public safety
let me
is
tell
a
you what,
big
let me tell
issue
you what I
that's
feel.
not just contemporary.
From my perspective, if you want to talk about me being a city manager, I doubled the size of the city. I also reduced the millage rate. The challenge and I also changed the codes. It's in order for builders to build more. So the challenge that had to do with me, if you want to hold a conversation about it, we can hold that conversation, and I can contact council people and you can speak person to person with them. And I would feel extremely comfortable with that because I was very successful there. I had a challenge with one issue, and it had to do with an ethical issue that I would not cross, and I did not. Consequently, I lost my employment, and
That's not what the reporting says.
I can give you the right newspaper article, and it can explain it to you if you'd like to have it. Now, if you cherry pick and you're looking for a specific cause, you certainly can find that. The other challenge I have with is where you make statements about our past. We've been successful where we've been. I've been a very successful chief. I understand development. In fact, the book that you are promoting, the urban planning book, I think it's a very good book, but it's not a code book. And that's my challenge with it.
So I want to get back on task here, and I'm going to ask that we focus on the current situation. Colleagues, are there any more questions for BFD? We've been joined by Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th District. Thank you, Chief Ford.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna wrap up in a moment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to give testimony? Yes, ma'am. If you could. I don't think we filled out a sheet, but that's all right. Just please, come on up. Please speak clearly into the mic. State your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Alyssa Domsel, 1223 Berry Street, 21211. For background, going back to Liz Cornish's letter, was the person who was assaulted on Falls Road on June 2nd by a man in a pickup truck with a BCFD decal. The incident was exactly as I described. To Liz, he slowed down, came well within safe and legal passing distance at high speed, and then pulled in front of me and yelled, "I still hate you," quite obviously using his personal vehicle as an attempt to intimidate me. But of course, with the Baltimore City Fire Department decal, it takes it on a different tone. So I wanted to first sort of speak to what Councilman Dorsey referred to as sort of the personal experience of sort of where we end up, and then I also would like to respond a bit to a statement that I heard from Chief Ford. I think sometimes there's an idea that there's a war or some sort of ongoing fight between the fire department and cyclists. And I just want to provide a little bit of context for my day on June 2nd. I lived in Bolton Hill at the time. I rode my bike from Bolton Hill to the 33rd Street Y, riding down 33rd Street, a very busy corridor, no incidents whatsoever. I rode from 33rd Street to the Eye Doctor in Roland Park, no incidents whatsoever. Again, two very busy corridors. The only person in any vehicle who broke the law, who came within the safe legal passing distance of 3 feet, and in any way used his vehicle to intimidate me, was somebody with a BCFD decal on his car. To me, that warrants investigation, because that is someone whose job it is to presumably drive around and make the city safer in his professional life. In his personal life, using his car to drive around and actively make the city less safe. I was not anyone's adversary that day. I was not anyone's instigator. I was a lady trying to get home from the eye doctor. And so this is becoming personal. It's my apologies if I sound nervous. This relates to my personal safety, so it's a little hard to talk about. And so to me, this is it was an incident among other incidents that were referred to in Ms. Cornish's letter that warranted investigation. And I am unaware of any demonstrable steps that have been taken to identify the assailant at the level of the fire department. And I was surprised to hear Chief Ford earlier in this hearing state that he was unaware of there being multiple incidents against cyclists, because I believe he was, and I have evidence that he was well aware of my incident. And so I just wanted to either invite clarity, I wanted to speak my experience, and I wanted to perhaps invite clarity on this issue, and invite the fire department to share what demonstrable steps have been taken, not just in my incident, but in the incident of the public meeting and any incidents related to harassment, violent threats on social media, anything of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domsel. Chief Ford, if you want to address.
I was aware of her incident. I was aware of the claim of her incident, and I'm aware of the other incident. Those are the only two I'm aware of. As far as all the things that are supposedly on social media, don't know anything about it, hadn't been brought to me. Those are the only two I'm aware of. And those incidents, I took internal actions on as necessary.
What, if anything, can you discuss about the final disposition of those two incidents?
I cannot. They're personnel issues.
Okay. Is there, can you confirm whether or not the individual involved in the incident with Ms. Domsel has been identified?
As of yet, I don't think the person has been identified.
Okay, and can you discuss what steps your senior team is taking to identify that individual?
What I think they did was they looked for video around that area. There was none. Also, there was a name sent to us, and from what I understand, they're checking into the name.
So there was just to clarify so I fully understand, Chief, there was a name of a fire department employee who was floated to you to investigate whether or not that individual was in fact responsible for that incident?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a time frame for when you expect to have some final disposition in that matter?
No, I don't.
Okay. Is that something that you could look into expediting? And
I can look into it, but even after I look into it, I don't know how much information I can share afterwards based upon what we do.
Right.
Because it is a personnel issue.
Considering that it is a personnel issue and that you're limited by law and I'm sure the labor agreement, would it be reasonable for us to ask for you to tell us when that matter's concluded?
Yes.
Okay. And would it also be reasonable for us to ask you to tell us once you have identified who that individual is with no further information, but just a positive?
I don't know. I have to find out. I have to find out if I have the latitude to do that. I don't know that to be. I would lean toward telling you I don't have that latitude. In fact, I'm almost comfortable saying that, but I will. We will check into it.
So if you could let the committee know, and you can just, Amy Beth, if you want to send me an email and just get me confirmation of whether or not you can let us know when that individual is identified. After you give us that confirmation, hopefully you are able to tell us, hey, we can tell you when that individual is identified, then subsequently know when you have identified that individual, and subsequently let us know once there's some type of final disposition in that matter. That would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, sir.
Is that a reasonable request everyone can agree to and is?
Yes, sir.
Understands? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Dorsey.
Does that get us to a point where Ms. Domsel will somehow be made aware of who this person is? I mean, if nothing else, this person deserves to face their accuser.
I'm sorry, I didn't know the last thing you said, Councilman.
Does this get us to a point where the person, a person who might be identified and reasonably thought to have committed this act would be identified to Ms. Domsel?
That's what I said. I can't say that to be the case. I don't know. I mean, there are certain, I don't know, and we'll check into what latitude we have in completely in that situation.
And in terms of the name that you already have, is that, do you know, is that based on trying to find somebody who owns the type of vehicle that was described?
You're asking me
How that name came about. I just want to ensure that at the very least the department is taking, if the name that you have is not the right name.
I received the name by email. Is that what you're asking me?
I mean, if the name that you have turns out to
Not to be the person.
not be the person, has the department taken the very basic step of asking all employees of the department, do you own or have access to a vehicle of this description? I would think that you would have the basic capacity to ask that question of all firefighters in the city and very quickly narrow down that list.
Okay. I can't tell you whether or not that's happened or not.
Okay.
The person that would be in charge that is not here today.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could follow up and provide us with answers to those questions, it would be greatly appreciated, Chief.
I want to point out something. I mean, there was statements of discriminatory, this, that, and other thing, and over my tenure here, and what I have worked extremely hard to be relevant, to be a relevant utility for the city of Baltimore beyond public safety and public safety. Right now, the citizens of the city of Baltimore hire the firefighters for the city of Baltimore. Right now, approximately 20% of the people who work on those trucks right now were hired by citizens that live in the city of Baltimore. We have made it that far. We have high school programs to bring kids in. I can go on and on about things that we're trying to do to be a relevant utility to the city. Our goal is not to be a detriment, and our goal is not to bully and discourage anybody from their right to ask for anything in this city. I'm not saying I don't have one or two people that I have challenges with. I do, but that's not the culture we're initiating, and my people know that. And they also know I have some rules, and one of the rules is the quickest way to get out of this organization or be on my wrong side is to mistreat each other and mistreat this community. I take it very, very seriously.
Thank you, Chief.
Afternoon, Josh Greenfield, Maryland Building Industry Association. I want to switch gears just a little bit away from that really kind of troubling and personal stuff, but I don't know why the video is made, but what the video tells me is what Councilman Stokes and Councilman Dorsey said, is that we've got to get moving with the bill you guys passed out of this committee a couple weeks ago. I hope the council will take it up at its next session and move the bill. We got to get past this fighting. There are compromises. There are ways that everybody can work together. We got to work towards having streets that work for everybody. And part of that is enacting the NACDO guidelines, and part of that is probably moving towards some type of more comprehensive document. But we got to be able to put all this behind us and move forward. So I implore the council to move that bill next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Hi, Jed Weeks from Baltimore. Thank you, Chairman Costello. I just want to be brief. I think, Liz outlined our willingness to be collaborative and work towards solutions with the city and the fire department, but it's really, really hard to work towards those solutions when they can't even remember who we are. I stood here right next to Chief Ford at the hearing, introduced myself, talked about our problems. He can't remember who I am. Chief Everett sits next to me in the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Commission meetings. Been in meetings with Liz over 14 months talking about Potomac Street, talking about various different bike lane issues. We've been right next to them in small meetings with less than 10 people, and they can't remember who we are. It's really, really hard to have demonstrable progress or to work towards solutions, a common goal, if people can't even remember your face or name, or they claim not to. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? So, Josh, thank you for your position on this issue. I'd like to reiterate that I believe the council has taken a reasonable approach to how we're handling this bill that has passed out of committee. As I previously stated, I'm committed to finding a way not to pass that bill, but we do need to see that demonstrable progress on the development projects and on the cycle track projects. What we asked for, and I'd just like to reiterate and state it on the record here, is for final resolution of the following 4 development projects: Charles Village Streetscape, Towns at Eager Park and 1001 Rutland Avenue, Woodbury Subdivision, and Yard 565601 Eastern Avenue, better known as PEMCO, as well as final resolution on the Maryland Cathedral cycle track. So we're requesting that by something in writing. I'm assuming just an updated letter of what Ms. Lazier sent us last week by Monday at noon. If we have that final resolution as we requested, I will advocate to my colleagues. I've already talked with the council president and the sponsor of the bill, Councilman Dorsey. I will be advocating for holding that bill on second reader. And then hopefully we can talk on Monday, immediately after the hearing, about how we continue to move forward to get some changes in place, whether that's policy or executive order from the mayor or legislative remedy, so that we can start to streamline all of these things. We acknowledge that there are some process issues in which fire department has been left out of the process, specifically with DOT, and that's completely unacceptable, and that's not the fire department's fault. Or you, Chief Ford, or anyone in your administration within the fire department. We also know there's the PUD review committee that's starting to take shape and dealing with how we deal with PUDs as they're approved, and making sure that fire department related issues are addressed early on in the process, so that we're providing some level of certainty for developers. Once they get that PUD approved, they know that if they apply for a permit for X, Y, and Z, that the fire department's not going to oppose them, because the fire department has had opportunity to review in detail any of the issues that may have come up as a result of that PUD. So just to reiterate again, our expectation is that we receive something in writing by noon on Monday, July 9th, and that would include final resolution again on Charles Village Streetscape, number 2, Towns at Eager Park, number 3, Woodbury Subdivision, number 4, the PEMCO site, and number 5, a final resolution on the Maryland Cathedral cycle track. And that, colleagues, anything else to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you all, and thank you, Chief Ford. We're now in recess.